Hey guys, on the one-on-one interview show today, one of my favorite authors, David Mann, he is here to talk about his brand new book called Total Focus that he just released with Navy SEAL sniper turned entrepreneur, Brandon Webb. So you don't want to miss this. It's a great interview coming up. Hey John, welcome to the program.
Hey, great to be here.
Great having you here. You and I have so much fun together. This is going to be a two-parter because I think you crank out a new book like every other week. So this may be a whole David Mann series coming up. Today we're going to talk about the new book with Brandon Webb, Total Focus, which is that coming out? Is that this week that it's released?
Yeah. Yes, actually.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, this is good timing. And then on part two, we're going to talk about the recipe, the book you've got coming out, I think mid-October. So
fantastic.
Busy guy, tell the audience a little bit more about you.
Well, we're talking about writing and talking about books. So I guess The first thing I should say is it didn't start out this way. I never planned to be an author. I didn't go to school for it. I went to school for the cello. I started out as a classical musician. My dad was a choral conductor. My mom was a music teacher. And that was my plan. And I've kind of bounced a little bit like a pinball through the last few decades, through about 4 or 5 different careers. I'm not going to go into all of them in detail because it would waste our time and be boring, but it wasn't boring to me. I went from classical music, composer, cellist, which is still the guiding light of my life. Music was my everything when I was a kid. And even now, writing a book to me is like writing a composition. There's always music in my head. It's got a musical structure to it. I think that way. But I went from there to education. I started high school with some friends of mine when I was in high school. I went from there to nutrition and natural foods, macrobiotics. I did that for 10 years. And I went from there into marketing and sales. And I don't consider myself a highly gifted business person, but I did that for a while. And I always seemed to end up editing other people's stuff. There was always a newsletter or an article or a periodical or something that needed to be made better, and it would land in my lap. Both my parents were teachers and academicians, and it kind of came to me naturally. So I spent a lot of years as an editor, eventually professionally as editor of a couple of different business journals. And that's what kind of edged me back end first into a writing career. It was like editing other people's stuff, which turned into ghostwriting, which turned into collaboration, which turned into full-fledged co-authorships, which is what I do now.
Yeah. Are you still playing the cello?
I haven't touched the cello in quite some time. I keep threatening to my wife that when I'm 70 or maybe it's 80, I'm going to go back to composition because I really love composition.
Well, maybe what we should do, I'm an old guitar player and I haven't picked up a guitar in a long time. We should start us a little band there, like who is it, Stephen King and
I see Stephen King over your shoulder.
Some of those guys.
Dave Barry and Amy Tan. Yeah, they had the rock bottom remainders.
There we go. We need to do something. The David Mann Orchestra or something along those lines. So you kind of sort of backed into writing. You started off as an editor, and that's when I think you built some relationships with people like Bob Berg and others. How did being an editor first help you become a writer or a better writer?
I developed, so a lot of what I was editing at first for years was articles, relatively short articles, sometimes, maybe 800 words was the shortest, my own editorials up to 2,000 words, 3,000 words, not huge. Mm-hmm. And it gave me an opportunity, and in a lot of cases there were people contributing articles who weren't professional writers. They were professionals at whatever they were doing, and they were writing about it. It gave me the opportunity to just develop the craft of improving writing, of taking what were really basically rough drafts in many cases, and polishing them, improving them, without it being my writing. Mm-hmm. So, looking back on it, I realized that it didn't have the emotional attachment that you can have to your own writing. Mm-hmm. The craft without the attachment. I think that was very fortunate for me. And then in the process, I also would apply the same craft to my own stuff, which is harder, I think. Mm-hmm. But I became really practiced at it in that short form.
Do you edit your own? Do you hate editing your own stuff?
I don't actually. I I do. I do. For me, however, it's two completely different mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
Writing something, and I think one of the hardest things for me, and my observation is, it may be the single biggest challenge for would-be writers, and even for RB writers,
Right.
it is to turn off the critical faculty when you're writing. I mean, you know this very well. You
Yep.
can't, the first draft of anything is crap, said Hemingway. You can't write with your editorial faculty turned on, because you kill it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to make love and taking a photograph of yourself at the same time. That's a pretty weird analogy, but I think that might be accurate.
And somewhat hard to do, I can tell you from personal experience.
I was just guessing. You won't, but you can't, and that's what people do. They start writing, mm-hmm. and within a few sentences they go, oh, like, no, that's no good. I should do it this way. I should do it that way. And it kills it, and it's stillborn. So for me, writing and editing are two totally different, brain faculties, and I can't do them on the same day. But once I've got a draft, I love editing. I love improving. I love tinkering. I love that whole aspect of it. My favorite part of a book, in a way, is when we're in we're in like copy edit mode, because it's like dessert. It's easy.
Right. Now, when you write, do you, for example, like with me, I'm kind of a stream of consciousness writer. I just write and write and write and write, and then like you, I have to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
If I'm going to edit my own stuff, I kind of have to do the out of body thing. Because, we writers, we love our own words. God forbid you take a word or make a contraction out of my words. But and that's what you're saying you do. You have to really compartmentalize the writer from the editor, which I think is why a lot of writers cannot self-edit. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten much better at it. I mean, let me say this, I've gotten much more practiced
mm-hmm.
at the non-attachment of it, because I've simply seen so many instances where I thought it was really good and cutting something made it much better. I developed one of my favorite sayings is, I've never met an article that can't be improved by being made shorter.
Right.
But for me, I'm not really a stream of consciousness writer, or maybe not in the same way you describe yourself. I know every writer is very different about this in their relationship to outlines and to sequence and to structure and to how mm-hmm. they operate. Mm-hmm. And there's no one right way, as any writer really knows. For me, it's funny. I'm right in the middle. Right now, I'm starting a new book, new parable. And I was watching myself today. What I usually end up doing is I get 3 files going. One file is called outline. One file is called chunks. And one file is called draft. And chunks is just stuff I pour in. It could be stuff from transcripts of interviews I've done, if it was a co-writing book. It could be brainstorming I've done. It could be whatever it's from. It could be research. And it's arranged roughly chronologically in terms of how I think the book's going to go. But it's really messy and voluminous. Then I got this outline, which is my kind of left brain critical thinking. And then there's this draft. For me, the process of writing is a constant seesaw back and forth between the big picture kind of outline view and the immediate view, where I have to throw the outline out of my head and just mm-hmm. be in the flow. And I mean, I'll often do that in 2 different rooms. I actually have my outline seat, which is where I'm sitting right now.
Right.
And then I'll have my stream of consciousness seat, which is about 15 feet away in an armchair. And this morning I'm gonna just go with a pad of paper for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the outline is.
Yeah.
This afternoon, I'm going to sit with my outline, and I'm going to mess with that. So it's a back and forth process for me.
So you don't have an out of body experience. You literally get up and change chairs.
Yeah, I do. I change chairs. Yep.
Maybe that's what I've got. I've got one chair in here amid all these dogs. So I'm kind of, I can do caps, I guess. When you write, do you use Microsoft Word, or what do you use?
I do.
You ever tried Scrivener?
I have never. I've looked at it. I've looked at so many things, and I am so comfortable with Word.
Same here.
Back in 1998, no, maybe it was earlier, 1994. I forget when it was. Way back when, I read the whole manual for Microsoft Word. It was early then.
Yeah.
And I just learned it, and I got keyboard commands. Whenever I get a new version of Word, I port over my own keyboard commands. It's just something I really know really well. I work on a blank Word doc. Boom. And what I actually do a lot of my writing, this pad of paper, Hey, that's where a lot of my stuff starts. And
Yep.
I scribble. I don't write a whole draft on paper, but I write my first ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start a sentence. I have, first pages that I've actually put on my blog that show the messy first page of mine, like Stephen King does in his book on writing, where he shows his own revisions in his own handwriting. Pretty soon, I get onto my keyboard and I'm in Word, and I'm in Word for the rest of the game.
Yeah, you and we're a lot alike, which is flattering to me. I'm glad I copy your process, but I'm the same way. I'm an old Microsoft Word user. I buy the pads with the little squares on them because I like to draw. But I go through. I can't tell you how many of these every month or so because I do the same. I'll kind of outline. I'll sketch out ideas, and then I will have like my main document, and then I'll have a document called notes, and I'll have another one called characters, and I'm constantly going back and forth. But I'm with you. I'm somewhat of an expert Word user. I can't imagine having to learn anything new at my age.
You know what I've gotten really good at?
What's that?
I've gotten really good at keeping 3 screens open at once.
Mm-hmm.
I work on a laptop. I used to have a whole operation with 14 computers, my own graphic designers when I was in publishing. It's all gone. It's me and my laptop. And what I do is I have one screen on the left, one screen on the right. I can see them both fully. I work in normal view, not page view. And then I have a third screen sort of sitting underneath the first 2, and I can flip between those 3 like Keith Emerson keyboards. That's what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, same here. Let these young people have that fancy smanchy software.
These young kids anyway.
We don't need to learn anything new. I mean, it's
Microsoft Word like my grandpappy used.
Well, who is it that writes all his books in longhand? I think James Patterson writes everything in longhand on. Of course, he's got a whole army of gorgeous girls to do his transcribing. But
probably read his own
I saw an interview with him, and he says, I can't imagine having to type. I write everything out. So
isn't that interesting?
I think you have to go with the process that works for you, don't you?
I'm a musician, man. I grew up playing the piano and the cello. It's like it's just natural for me. That said, I got to have a pen and paper to draft first ideas.
Yep. I hope paper never goes away. So I want to talk a little bit more about the process, because I get a lot of questions on this show of, it's the old excuses, John. You and I have both used them. Reasons why I didn't write anything today. I've got the writer's block. I didn't have the time. I get a lot of people saying, well, I've got a great idea for a book. How do I actually get started? What do you say to these folks other than, put your fingers on keys and start typing?
Yeah, because everyone says put your fingers on keys and start typing, and that's only useful so far.
You got to know what's coming out.
For me, what I can share is, well, first of all, one thing I can share is that I have, some writers say they got to write at the same time every day. Mm-hmm. That's sort of true for me. Here's how it is for me. I have 2 different modes I write in. One is when I'm generating something new, and it could be at the beginning of a project. It could be after I've done a bunch of research. In my case, a lot of that is often interviews with people, or it may be in the case of like with a Go-Giver, I'll read a lot of Bob's blog posts, or Bob and I will talk a bunch, or Brandon and I will talk on the phone. So maybe I've had a lot of stuff that go in my head. But when I'm actually going to generate something that might turn into a draft or beginning of a draft, then I have a schedule that I follow that works for me. When I'm doing anything else, like if I'm taking the beginnings of a draft and expanding it, or I'm revising it, or I'm spinning it out, or I'm incorporating other material, that stuff I can do anytime. I can do it in the afternoon, I can do it in the evening, whatever. But if I'm drafting, like I'm creating, I'm getting an idea, here's what I do. It works best for me first thing in the morning. I get up in the morning, whether it's 8 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever it is. I get a cup of hot tea. I haven't talked to anybody. I go downstairs to my armchair. I get a blank pad of paper. I get my headphones on. I've got probably Philip Glass going in my head, or maybe Bach or something that has this fairly continuous and it doesn't have too many surprises. It's not Beethoven. And I sit down and it's like meditation. I get my mind as empty as I can. I am not thinking. I'm not thinking, how do I start? Or I'm not thinking, okay, the character's name is Jim. I am thinking nothing. I try to get blank. Like my image is like the surface of a pond first thing in the morning. I blogged about this a few months ago with a beautiful picture of the still pond in England that wonderful photographer, I got his permission to use it and everything. It's just a great picture. That's my brain. And I will sit there, and it's painful for me, or it's uncomfortable, because I don't know what to do. I genuinely don't. And what I will tell myself, it's a lot like meditation. What I will tell myself is, that's okay. Just trust that it's there. There is a good idea trying to get in. Just don't get in the way. Just relax, and I'll get some thoughts. And it might be a scrap of dialogue. It might be an idea for a character. It might be whatever it is. And I'll start writing it down. And I won't write too much, because I don't want to interfere with that still surface of that lake. I don't want to throw too many rocks into it. I'll write a little bit. I'll go back to the lake. I'll close my eyes. I'll get some thoughts. I might do this for an hour. I might do it for 2 hours. I might only do it for 40 minutes. I might do that 3 or 4 or 5 times in a week. And the rest of the book is at my computer. But those few sessions will get something that will probably end up being the best writing in the book. I can't do it a lot because I'll get exhausted. So what I would say to the person who gets writer's block is 2 things. First of all, I never get writer's block. And the reason that I never get it is that if I feel it coming, I stop writing and I go read. I give myself permission to just pick up a great crime novel, my favorite stuff. I'll go read Harry Bingham, the Fiona Griffith series, or I'll go read, whatever that I'm in love with, and I'll just give myself to it. Yeah. Sometimes I just get dry. I can't write because there's nothing in the well. So I'll go read. I don't read the kind of books I write. I read just stuff I love. That's the first thing. You got to read. The second thing is, I get to a point where I do what I just described, where I just get myself empty and let it come. And it's only a tiny fraction of the book's process, but it's the fraction without which nothing else works.
There are a couple of things kind of sparked there as you're talking. The effect, and maybe it's because you're a musician, but I know musicians, and it always seems that no matter what they're doing, music plays a part of that. And I don't know if that's just a brain stimulation thing, or what do you think? There's a certain kind of music I would think that you would have to listen to, like, here's my mixtape when I go work out at the gym. It's going to pump you up. It's going to get you motivated. When you are sitting there, you mentioned Bach and some of the others. What do you think that music has? Is it just a soothing factor, or is there something in your brain that just clicks, or how does that work?
That's great, because I think it's actually both those things. I mean, there's no question that it is a soothing factor in the sense that it is almost hypnotic. It filters out distractions and puts me where I am. So that's certainly true. But it's not just white noise, because white noise will do that too. Sometimes, by the way, when I'm doing that first writing thing, I'll actually put on a soundtrack of just stream and birdsong. One of those nature things.
Kind of a nature thing?
I do that sometimes. Mostly it's music. So there's this legend that they have in Bali about gamelan music. And I don't know if you're familiar with gamelan music, but the gamelan orchestra of Indonesia, of Bali, is this incredible orchestra, sort of like gonged instruments that sounds almost like water going on, all kinds of pitches and levels and speeds and so forth. And they have this legend about music, which is that the music is actually, that they don't create the music. But the orchestra is, they don't use this word, but it's like an amplifier. The music is already going on all around us at all times. It's the orchestra's job just to catch it, like a radio antenna catching the FM waves and translate it into something you can hear. To me, that's what a book is like. Stephen King describes it as, he considers a book an artifact that he's not creating, he's uncovering with a whisk broom and a pick and shovel.
I love that.
A great description. And when I read that, I went click. I went, damn, man, that's exactly it. That's what it is for me. Only for me, it isn't digging it out of the ground so much as it is catching it out of the air. To me, and I mean this quite literally, when I sit down to write a story, I feel like the story's there, vibrating, humming in the air. It's my job to catch it, capture it on paper. And for me, music is a big part of that. It's that kind of wave and resonance and structure. There's also a structural aspect to music. There's an arc to a composition that I've studied, for years as a musician, that that is for me, it's a big part of writing. It's in every book I do has some kind of cyclic aspect to it.
One of the things that fascinates me about you is you write in a variety of genres. You write the parable books, you write the I guess you could call them motivational, but you also, you're one of those guys, you can pretty much write anything. Is there a favorite genre that you like to write in?
There is. It's funny because I've spent a lot of time, I've done a lot of books that were kind of like nonfiction books in the business, leadership, success, personal development sphere. Right. And that's kind of an outgrowth of my early work in business where I was writing newsletters for my team and so forth. And that to me feels like writing a big article is what that feels like.
Yeah.
But I've written, as you know, a bunch of memoirs, other people's stories. Everything from, a woman business leader to a Navy SEAL sniper to a Democratic Paul to a variety of kinds of memoirs. I was working on one with a hit Nashville songwriter, but we haven't found a publisher for that yet. I love doing that. It's like stepping into another person's shoes and absorbing that person's and sort of being that person. I love that. However, my favorite thing I've discovered is these parable stories. Man, I just love these stories. They're like these little miniatures, but they have real emotion and depth to them. It's like that's the challenge: is to make it simple, make it teach a principle, but not feel didactic and like a two-dimensional lecture at a thing.
Right. It's not preachy.
Moral. Not preachy. You want to tell a real story about actual human beings, and so I've discovered that's my favorite. That's what I love to do most.
Well, the thing I like about your parable books, like the Go-Getter or Go-Giver, where'd I get Go-Getter from? Right. They really are works of fiction. They just have a, kind of a moral or a lesson attached to them, right?
Yeah.
And that goes back to what Aesop back years and years ago.
Yeah.
But why do you think those books are so successful? Because some of the most successful business and advice books ever written, including yours, were parables.
Yes. And also, if you look at the sphere of public speaking, you look at some of the greats of public speaking, like Zig Ziglar or Bill Gove or Nito Cobain or any of these people, what you'll see they do is they have a point that they want to make, and they probably a point and several subpoints they want to make. But the way they do it is by stringing a little necklace of stories like pearls. They will tell a series of 3 stories or 5 stories or whatever. And that's where the humor is. That's where the pathos is. That's where the tragedy, that's where it gets real. That's where they connect with the audience. And that's where the point gets made and remembered. So a great business book is going to have great stories in it. Yeah. Whoever read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People remembers the story about the guy who was upset by this kid who was acting out in the subway or whatever, and they couldn't figure out why this father wasn't controlling this kid. And then at the end of the subway ride, the father says, I'm so sorry, but my son is not behaving well. We just discovered his mother has just died.
Right.
Or whatever. It's like the story is where it gets real. My belief is until there's a story, there's no teaching. Until there's a story, there's no learning.
Yeah.
So I think parables really work. One of the fun things about a book like The Go-Giver is I get people coming to me saying, I don't read a lot of books. I'm not really a reader, but I couldn't put this one down. Yeah. Oh, man, that's satisfying. I realize we're here to talk about focus, but that's even a book like Focus, which is not a parable. It's a 7 chapters business book. It's like Stephen Covey. I jokingly refer to it as the 7 deadly habits of highly lethal business people.
Right.
And it's 7 principles from special operations applied to the sphere of business.
Exactly. John, you do a lot of ghostwriting, as do I. I don't do it on your level. I wish I did. But let's talk a little bit about that, because when I tell folks that I do ghostwriting, I have actually had people go, well, that's illegal. It's immoral. And it's just, and granted, the crowd I hang out with is not all there sometimes, but
you need new friends too.
My thing is, I think the oldest ghostwritten book is probably the Bible, and if that was okay, I'm gonna get a pass. Talk a little bit about ghostwriting, about your career as a ghostwriter, and advice for doing so.
I hear it a lot on the other side. We hear people say, "Well, he didn't really write his own book."
Yeah.
And that makes it like invalid. I mean,
Are you telling me that Donald Trump doesn't sit down at Word and write every word of those books?
Let's not go there. But I mean, you take someone like Brandon Webb. Brandon Webb, my Navy SEAL sniper friend. He's actually a hell of a writer himself and does a lot of his own articles for his blog business. But someone like that has got an incredible story. He needs a writer who really knows the craft. There's nothing ignoble about that. But
right.
So ghostwriter. Ghost is an interesting term. Ghosts are invisible. You can't see them. I consider myself. I've done books that I consider ghostwriting, where you can't see me.
Right.
I'm there. And I'm literally not on the cover of the book. In fact, I'm probably not even on the title page.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them aren't even on my website. I've got a couple of books that part of the agreement was I'm invisible, so you don't even know I wrote. I've written a lot of books that are so and so forth, famous person with John David Mann.
Right.
And it's kind of a gray area for me between ghost and co-authorship. Some of them, again, like one of my favorite books that I've written was a book called A Funny Side Up. And it's the story of Rita Davenport, who is a hilarious public speaker and a businesswoman. And she's like sort of the Phyllis Diller of the business circuit. She's hilarious. And I wrote her life story. Well, that is ghostwriting, man. I mean, she acknowledged me in the beginning, and I even have my own forward about how we got connected, and I'm very present book, but that's ghostwriting. Then I got books like my books with Brandon, where it's Brandon's story, but I show up a lot.
Yeah.
All the way to books where it's really a 50-50 partnership, like the Go Giver books, where it's the two of us.
One of the questions that always cracks me up is that, aren't you sad that your name is not on that book? And I'm like, no, I'm sad when my name is not on the check. So, I can't pay my rent with good intentions or parts of my ego. Let's talk about Brandon Webb, because you've got a new book coming out with Brandon, Total Focus, which I'm just getting into. First off, talk a little bit about Brandon, because I mean, he's quite a character, and then talk about how the book came to be.
So you all probably remember in April 2009, right? Barack Obama had just taken office. We had just been through an incredible financial crash. We were in the middle of a financial crash. The country was feeling pretty blue. We were pretty down. It was a bad time. Most of us had our houses underwater. Many of us had our houses underwater. Mm-hmm. And these three pirates, Somali pirates, kidnapped this guy called Captain Phillips.
Right.
This boat.
Tom Hanks.
And he wasn't Tom Hanks yet, but he soon would be.
Right. Yep.
And 3 Navy SEAL snipers took out these 3 pirates. And it was like all over the news for days. It was on CNN. One day, my literary agent was sitting there watching TV with her sister, and looking at Anderson Cooper interviewing a guy who had trained a whole generation of Navy snipers, explaining what their training would have been like. And she turned to her sister and said, I want to represent that guy. I want that guy as a client. That was a Saturday. On that Monday, that guy walked into her office and said, I need an agent. That was Brandon Webb. Mm-hmm. And they wrote to me and said, hey, you want to write this book with this guy, Brandon Webb? At that point, I didn't have any military writing experience at all. But Brandon and I clicked, got along immediately. And we have since published 5 books together. So
oh, wow.
We got ourselves a writing partnership that's going to go for our lives. Writing with Brandon is a blast. Brandon was a Navy SEAL, became a Navy SEAL sniper. His platoon was one of the first boots on the ground after 9/11 in Afghanistan. When he got back to the States, he was tapped with a friend to revamp the sniper program, and eventually became master instructor of the Navy SEAL sniper program, arguably the most exacting, difficult sniper program on the face of the earth. Right. So that was his military background. He got out of the military and launched a career as an entrepreneur, and that's where I met him. In the last 5 years, when our first book came out, his memoir, Red Circle, it was just about to come out, and he called me one day and said, hey, I had this idea for a website. That was January 2012. Flash forward to now, 5 years later, that little idea for a website is a business that's valued at over $100 million.
Wow.
So he's done okay as an entrepreneur, and that's what this book is about. It's about what he did, how he did it, and the lessons involved that we can all learn from and apply in our own businesses.
What a great story.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I told you this last time we talked. I think you need to do a book about you and Brandon, kind of a road movie kind of thing, where you got the intelligent, creative guy on a road trip with the Navy SEAL sniper. I think there's a book there, John.
It could be.
I'd like some credit there, but let's talk about Total Focus, which is coming out this week. And is this your fifth or sixth book with Brandon?
This is our fifth book. Yeah, I'm counting. Fifth, number 5.
And this book, tell us what it's about.
So again, I like to call it the 7 Deadly Habits of Highly Lethal Business People. The real subtitle is Make Better Decisions Under Pressure.
I like yours better.
You like mine?
Yes.
Right above the subtitle, there's I think this may be my favorite cover quote, roofline quote I've ever had, which it says, "The most exciting business book you'll ever read," from Marshall Goldsmith. It does start out with his finger on the trigger, watching a farmer trying to decide whether or not he's going to shoot the guy. The premise of the book is this, that SEALs and Delta, Green Berets, MARSOC, the Spec Ops, the Special Operations Warriors, and all the branches, not just the Navy, they are, in a sense, the entrepreneurs of the military force. If the rank and file soldiers and sailors are the employees of the business of the military world, these Spec Ops guys are the entrepreneurs. They're trained to think for themselves. They're trained to expect the unexpected, to develop solutions on the fly in impossible situations. And they have I'm talking about SEALs now because I've worked with a lot of them over the course of the books. They tend to have a higher than you'd think intelligence level, education level, and the basic thesis of the book is there are principles learned in the world of Spec Ops, in the theater of war, that can be applied if adapted intelligently and sensitively, and that's a big if, to the business world. You can't just take, you can't take behavior on the battlefield and just drop it down in Manhattan and have it work. And Brandon is quick to say he's seen a lot of former SEALs flame out in the business world because they just were, they were too brutal. You can't be a bull in the china shop of business. But what we do in Total Focus is take 7 key principles honed from the field of combat and training, applied in the field of business, and then illustrate those both in Brandon's experience over these 5 years, and also each chapter has a little profile of an extraordinarily successful business person from among Brandon's friends, all the way from the founder of BarkBox to a former CEO of Huffington Post, The Blaze, all kinds of colorful people, and how they, even without a military background, have employed one or another of these principles in the book.
How do you start writing a book like this? Did you and Brandon just come up with the idea, and then do you create a bullet list of these 7 principles, or do you just pry open the top of his head and poke around? What is your process there?
Aptly phrased, the bullet list. Well done, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It is a bullet
list.
Yes. When Brandon and I first started talking in 2009 about the book that would become the Red Circle, we had a bunch of ideas, and way back then, the first few weeks of talks, he said, we should do a business book together sometime. Because at the time, that's what I was doing. And so we had the idea a long time ago. A bunch of other books came first after the Red Circle. Then there was Among Heroes, which is a memoir of SEALs he's known who've all died. And that was a very poignant and painful book to write, but I thought an important one. Then came The Killing School, which is a memoir of 4 different snipers from different branches. And that was a gripping book. And then we had the YA book we did. But the business book always kind of floated in the background because we just thought that would be so cool to have the intersection of special operations and business. Once we got down to it and started creating a proposal to send around New York, it was the bullet list. And that was kind of my job. My job was to sift through what I knew by that point of Brandon's life and of the military world. And I'd learned a lot at that point, and start to kind of boil down what would these principles be. It started with the list, and then we took it from there.
How does that partnership typically work? You are, of course, the writer, but does Brandon do any of the writing at all? Does he send you pages? How does that work?
He doesn't do any of the writing per se of the manuscript, but I draw on things he's written, say for SoftRep, his original website, which has now become Hurricane Media, but it's SoftRep, SOFREP is his main blog, Special Operations Forces Report. And he's done a lot of writing for that. So I have his articles to draw from. He's done a lot of writing in other magazines, from Harvard Business Review to Business Insider and Inc. And so I get a lot of his stuff to draw from, which is awesome. I also interview him a lot, as I do with any co-authorship, and I draw from that. So it's a combination of sources, and sometimes I'll be working on a section and I'll say, dude, we need something here. Like, I don't understand what you did with this or with that. Can you say more about this? And he'll sit and he'll shoot me an email, and I'll take that as like a first draft and take that. So I'll get his input in various ways like that.
Yeah. So there really is a partnership there, even though you're the one doing the heavy lifting of the writing, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the inspiration. Do you ever feel like you're writing about almost a historical character? Is it really weird to write about someone that you've got that kind of personal relationship with? It's
the opposite for me. It doesn't feel like I'm writing about a historical character. It feels like I'm him. Or I mean, it doesn't feel like I'm him.
Right.
But man, to me, writing a book like this, and I had the same experience writing Rita Davenport's book, or John Addison's book, or Dan Burris's book. For me, it's like what it must be like to be Jamie Foxx and play Ray Charles, or whatever, to be Nicole Kidman and play Virginia Woolf. You sort of become that person.
Yeah.
And so I don't even sit and think, now what would Brandon do? I sit and think, what would I do? And I am Brandon when I think that. Right. So for me, it is channeling to a great extent.
It's almost like you're putting yourself in their skin and you're channeling their thoughts through your fingers or what have you.
And it's not woo-woo. It's just, you know what it is? I'll tell you, it's interesting. I finally figured out the word, and weirdly enough, it came while writing The Killing School. I was interviewing one of our snipers, and he said, what the fundamental skill of a sniper is empathy. I said, what are you talking? He said, most of a sniper's task is observation, is reconnaissance. Yeah. There's very little shooting involved. Sometimes there's no shooting involved. Sometimes you go through an entire tour of duty, and all you do is peer through a scope and you observe. You're an intelligence asset first and foremost. So a sniper is, number one, an expert observer. And he said the reason a sniper is so good is because they know what the person is going to do before the person even knows what they're going to do.
Yeah.
That's what the writer's skill is. It's empathy. You become that person because it's empathic.
That's a fascinating point. I never really thought about it, but when you are a sniper, pulling the trigger is a split-second thing, but there's a whole lot more that gets you up to it. And there's a lot more than just laying there, pointing at a target. Hence the book, right?
You may never pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And you know what we say? We say that in the business world, this is out of total focus, that in the business world, what are the actions that you do as a business person? Yes, as a CEO, you make decisions, you fire, you hire, you write a big check. That is 0.5%, 1/10 of what you do. Yeah. Most of what you do, if you're a good CEO, you observe, you absorb. You know what's going on not only in your field, but in every other field. Because if you think you can run a corporation or a one-man solo entrepreneurial operation or anything in between, if you think you can run it simply by watching your own field, by being an expert in your business, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah.
In this day and age, particularly, if you don't know what's going on in these unrelated fields, which are going to intersect yours tomorrow, you're dead. So you've got to be observing everything.
My favorite thing about talking to you, you're so passionate. You get those hands going like a maestro. It's you don't just sit there and answer questions, John. I love that.
You got to fall in love. That's one of the things about ghostwriting you asked about earlier. And it's also about co-authoring. For me, I have got to fall in love with the story. And I've actually turned down projects and even gotten out of projects that I'd already started in cases where it wasn't, it's not you, it's me. It wasn't working out. I have to sit down and have the talk. Yeah. Because I got to be in love with the project, with the person's life.
Yeah.
I've done books with Republicans and Democrats, and I was in love with both of them.
Well, do something about them, will you? Can
Yeah.
you write a parable where we all end up okay?
Actually, that's the next Go-Giver book.
Is that could be a work of fiction too strange for even me?
It's a book about two opposite sides trying to see each other's point of view.
Well, maybe if you got a little Republican mouse and a little Democratic mouse, and they're all trying to find the same cheese, and
hey,
whatever. You can see why I don't do parables, because
it may not be as bad as you think.
Yeah. So Total Focus is the book. It is out now?
Yes, it is out now.
And I would assume it can be found on Amazon bookstores. Where else?
Everywhere. Yes.
All right. What else you got coming up? Let's really quickly billboard part 2 of our interview. We come back and talk about the recipe. Give us a really quick thumbnail of that for a preview for part 2.
First of all, I'll say that Brandon and I are working on our next book already.
Oh, really? What is it?
It's called Mastering Fear.
Oh, okay.
That is going to be fun.
Look at your face. You're like, oh, yeah, man.
And of course, Bob Berg and I have another Go-Giver book coming out next year, which I just hinted at.
Excellent.
But to your question, this book that's coming out this fall, it's called The Recipe. And it's a parable, although a little bit more novelistic maybe than the Go-Giver.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a story about loss and love, not romantic love, but the love of a boy for his father, of a mentor for his charge, that kind of devotion, you might say. It's about the power of a great mentor and what it takes to mentor wisely. And it's on its surface, it's a story about a young boy, 14-year-old boy who's lost his father and who's really struggling in his life and how he finds his way through the help of an unexpected mentor. But it all takes place in a kitchen. And I wrote it with a chef, with an award-winning chef. And so there's food and cooking laced all through the book. There's even 14 recipes in the back of it.
And you're just all over the place. You go from snipers to cooking to Bob Berg, how would you sum up Bob Berg?
He is neither cook nor sniper.
There you go. He's pretty much everything else, though. So, John David Mann, always a pleasure talking to you, buddy. Every time you do one of these books, we've got to do another interview. Total Focus out now. The Recipe coming out October?
October 17. We have a pre-order bonus program going on.
Very good. And that's when we'll also air part 2 of this interview. For someone who wants to find out even more about John David Mann and his books, where do they go?
JohnDavidMann, 2 N's.com.
What are the odds? John, always a pleasure, buddy.
Likewise. Thank you, Tim. This is a blast.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.